Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into FOMO.
Yeah.
You know that feeling of missing out?
Yeah.
You sent over some fascinating articles and research on this, and we're going to unpack it all.
Yeah.
We'll explore the psychology behind it, its connection to social media, and most importantly, how to overcome it.
It's fascinating how our brains hasn't evolved as quickly as our technology.
Right.
That primal urge to belong, which was once crucial for survival, is now getting hijacked by algorithms designed to keep us glued to our
Oh,
screens.
dang. That's interesting.
That's really what's at the heart of FOMO, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Um,
It's like we're constantly bombarded with images and stories of everyone else seemingly having the time of their lives, achieving amazing things,
Right.
and we start to question our own choices and experiences.
And this constant comparison can have some serious consequences for our well-being.
Oh, really?
Research from the University of California, Irvine, found that individuals with high FOMO scores were more likely to experience anxiety and depression. They also discovered a correlation between FOMO and increased cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone. So it's not just a feeling, it's actually impacting our physical health.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's not just about feeling a little down. It's about the real tangible effects on our bodies and minds.
Exactly.
But even beyond the clinical studies, I think we can all relate to that feeling of distraction, of not being fully present, because we're so caught up in what everyone else is doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the role of social media becomes really interesting.
Okay.
The sources you shared highlight how platforms like Facebook and Instagram are designed to tap into our primal need for validation and connection.
Mm-hmm.
They create this illusion of perfection, this highlight reel that can be incredibly difficult to resist.
That highlight reel concept really hit home for me.
Right.
We logically know that people are only showcasing their best moments,
Right.
but emotionally, it's hard to escape that feeling of inadequacy when you're constantly scrolling through those curated feeds.
It's like knowing the magician is using tricks, but still being amazed by the illusion.
Yeah.
And the scary part is, it's not just affecting our mood.
Oh.
Studies have shown that FOMO can lead to risky behaviors like distracted driving or impulsive spending as we try to keep up with this perceived ideal.
It's almost as if we're hardwired to compare ourselves, but the digital age has amplified those tendencies to an unhealthy level.
Oh,
So if social media is this double-edged sword, both connecting and potentially isolating us, where do we go from here? How do we start to reclaim our attention and find a sense of balance?
that's a great question, and that's what we'll explore next.
Okay.
But before we dive into strategies, I think it's important to acknowledge that social media isn't the only culprit here.
Right.
While it certainly plays a significant role, FOMO can also stem from societal pressures, our own personality traits, and even just the overwhelming number of choices we have in modern life.
You're right. It's not just about the technology itself.
Right.
It's about the context in which we're using it.
Ex-
And this brings up something I found interesting in one of the sources.
Okay.
It talked about how not everyone experiences FOMO to the same degree.
Right.
Some people are naturally more prone to social comparison or have a stronger need for external validation.
Exactly. Understanding your personal triggers can be crucial in managing FOMO effectively.
That's a good point.
It's about recognizing those moments when those feelings start to creep in and having strategies in place to address them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So before we move on to those strategies, can you talk a little more about these individual differences? What makes some people more susceptible to FOMO than others?
Well, some research suggests that people with certain personality traits, like high neuroticism or low self-esteem, might be more vulnerable to FOMO.
Uh-huh.
They might be more sensitive to social rejection or have a harder time feeling content with their own lives.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like those pre-existing insecurities are amplified by the constant comparison and competition that social media often fosters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the role of our environment and upbringing.
Okay.
If we're raised in a culture that emphasizes achievement, status, and external validation, we might be more likely to develop FOMO tendencies.
It's interesting how all of these factors intertwine.
Yeah.
It's not just about the individual or the technology, but also about the broader societal messages we're constantly exposed to.
Right.
But let's get back to what you were saying about understanding our personal triggers.
Sure.
Can you give some examples of what those triggers might look like?
Sure. It could be something as simple as seeing a friend's vacation photos on Instagram and immediately feeling like you're missing out on an amazing experience.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe it's attending a networking event and feeling inadequate compared to everyone else's accomplishments.
Or even just scrolling through your newsfeed and seeing everyone else's seemingly perfect lives while you're stuck in traffic or having a bad day.
Right?
It's like those moments of comparison can sneak up on you and really impact your mood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why self-awareness is so crucial. By paying attention to those triggers, those specific situations or thoughts that tend to evoke FOMO, we can start to develop more effective coping mechanisms.
So it's like once you're aware of the problem,
Yeah.
you can start to take control of the situation rather than letting those feelings dictate your action.
Exactly. And that's what we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore practical strategies and mindset shifts that can help us break free from that FOMO spiral and cultivate a greater sense of contentment and presence in our own lives.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. So we've talked about the roots of FOMO and how it can manifest differently for each of us.
Right.
Now let's shift gears and get into the practical stuff, the how-to.
Okay.
What are some tangible things we can do to manage these feelings and stop them from taking over?
One powerful approach that comes up repeatedly in these sources is mindfulness.
Okay.
It's not just a buzzword,
Right.
It's about cultivating a detached awareness of our thoughts and feelings, allowing us to observe those FOMO-driven urges without getting swept away by them.
Okay.
The Headspace article you shared describes it as training our attention like a muscle.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Instead of immediately acting on that urge to check what everyone else is doing,
Right.
we can pause and ask ourselves, is this really serving me right now?
Right.
Or can I choose to focus on what I'm doing and who I'm with?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the more we practice bringing our attention back to the present moment, the easier it becomes to resist those impulsive, FOMO-fueled actions. It's like building a mental resilience to those anxieties.
The FOMO. Causes and Solutions article also mentioned digital detoxes.
Right.
Is that something you recommend? And if so, how extreme does it have to be?
It doesn't have to be about going off the grid completely.
Okay.
Even small intentional breaks can make a difference.
Right.
The research is quite clear that limiting social media use has a positive impact on well-being. Scheduling tech-free time, turning off notifications, or even temporarily deleting those addictive apps can give us the breathing room to reconnect with ourselves and what truly matters.
I recently tried a little experiment where I silenced all non-essential notifications on my phone.
Okay.
At first, I felt that familiar phantom buzz, like I was missing something crucial.
Yeah.
But after a while, I realized how much calmer I felt.
Right.
I was less reactive, more focused, and I actually enjoyed the conversations I was having without that constant urge to check my phone.
That's a perfect example of how even small adjustments can shift our digital habits and create more space for presence and peace of mind.
Yeah.
And we're not about demonizing technology, but rather using it consciously and intentionally.
Speaking of intentionality, one of the sources highlighted the power of gratitude.
Okay.
It seems a bit simple, but is that really a FOMO buster?
It can be surprisingly effective.
Oh, really?
When we're caught in that FOMO spiral, our focus narrows to what we lack. A gratitude practice, even just jotting down a few things we appreciate each day, can shift that perspective.
Okay.
It's like consciously redirecting our attention towards the abundance in our lives.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
By focusing on what we already have, we're less likely to get caught in that endless cycle of wanting more, experiencing, achieving.
Right.
It's about appreciating the richness of our present experience.
Exactly. And the beauty of a gratitude practice is its accessibility.
Right.
It doesn't require special equipment or a huge time commitment. It can be integrated into our daily routines, making it a sustainable way to cultivate contentment.
So far, we focused on managing the symptoms of FOMO.
Okay.
But is there anything we can do to address the root cause, to actually shift our mindset so we're less susceptible to these feelings in the first place?
That's where the concept of cultivating a FOMO-resistant mindset comes in. This involves acknowledging and challenging those deeply ingrained assumptions that fuel our FOMO. Those beliefs that we need to have more, do more, be more to be happy or worthy.
It's almost like rewiring those unconscious scripts that tell us we're not enough as we are.
Right.
It's a big undertaking, but I can see how liberating it could be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The fear of missing out, FOMO, what it is and how to cope article really resonated with me. It suggests that FOMO often stems from a fear of rejection, a deep-seated belief that we need to be included in everything to be accepted and loved.
That's a powerful insight.
Yeah.
It makes me realize that constantly chasing after experiences and validation might actually be a way of avoiding that underlying fear of being left out or not being good enough.
It's like we're seeking external validation to fill an internal void.
Wow.
And the irony is, the more we chase those external things, the further we move away from that genuine sense of self-worth that can only come from within.
Sounds like a real catch-22. So how do we break free from that cycle? How do we cultivate that inner security and sense of self-acceptance that allows us to choose our own path with confidence and contentment?
Well, one powerful approach is to start questioning those underlying beliefs that drive our FOMO.
Okay.
Ask yourself, is it really true that my worth depends on having all these experiences or achieving all these things? What evidence do I have to support that belief?
Uh-huh.
Often, when we really examine those thoughts, we realize they're based on fear and insecurity, not reality.
It's like shining a light on those shadowy beliefs that we've been carrying around for so long.
Right.
Once we see them clearly, they lose their power over us.
Exactly.
But it's not just about dismantling those limiting beliefs. It's also about building up a more positive and empowering self-concept.
Right.
How do we do that?
That's where self-compassion comes in.
Okay.
It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness, understanding, and acceptance that we would offer to a good friend. Instead of beating ourselves up for feeling inadequate or envious, we can acknowledge those feelings with gentleness and remind ourselves that it's okay to not be perfect, to have limitations, to make mistakes.
I love the idea of befriending ourselves, especially when those negative thoughts start to creep in.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, and that's okay.
Exactly.
But it's one thing to practice self-compassion on our own. How do we cultivate that sense of belonging and connection that seems to be at the root of FOMO?
That's a great question, and it leads to one of the most important points highlighted across the sources you shared. It's the power of nurturing real-life connections, face-to-face interactions, meaningful conversations, shared experiences. These are the things that truly nourish our souls and create a sense of belonging.
It's so true. And it's easy to forget that when we're constantly bombarded with those curated digital connections.
Right.
But in reality, those online interactions can't replace the depth and warmth of genuine human connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the research backs this up.
Really?
Studies have shown that face-to-face interactions release oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which can reduce stress and increase feelings of happiness and well-being.
Interesting.
So prioritizing those real-life connections is not just a feel-good strategy, it's a biologically sound approach to combating FOMO.
That's fascinating. It's like our bodies are literally wired for connection.
Yeah.
So how do we make this happen? What are some tangible ways to prioritize those real-life interactions in our busy, often digitally driven lives?
The sources offer some great suggestions.
Okay.
Things like joining a group or club based on your interests, volunteering in your community, or even just making a conscious effort to schedule regular coffee dates or phone calls with friends and family. It doesn't have to be anything grand or elaborate.
Right.
The key is to make those face-to-face interactions a priority.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
It's about being intentional with our time and energy and making sure we're nurturing those connections that bring us joy and a sense of belonging. But I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes, even with our best efforts, we're going to feel that twinge of FOMO.
Yeah.
It's a part of the human experience, after all.
Exactly.
So what do we do in those moments? How do we navigate those feelings without letting them derail us?
That's a great point, and it brings us to another powerful tool in our FOMO fighting arsenal: reframing.
Reframing.
Okay, it's about consciously shifting our perspective and challenging those negative thoughts that tend to spiral out of control.
Can you give an example of what that might look like in practice? Say you're scrolling through social media and you see everyone having fun at a party that you weren't invited to.
Sure.
How would you reframe that situation?
Well, instead of going down that rabbit hole of why wasn't I invited or everyone's life is so much more exciting than mine,
Right.
I might remind myself that this is just a snapshot, a curated moment in time. It doesn't reflect the entirety of their lives or experiences. I might also choose to focus on the positive aspects of my own life, things that I'm grateful for or excited about.
It's about choosing to focus on our own lane, our own journey, rather than getting caught up in comparing ourselves to others.
Exactly.
But I imagine that takes practice, especially in a world that constantly encourages comparison.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a skill that we develop over time.
Right.
And it involves being mindful of our self-talk, those inner dialogues that can either fuel our FOMO or empower us to move through it with grace and resilience.
It sounds like it's about cultivating a more balanced and realistic perspective,
Right.
recognizing that everyone has their own unique journey with its own highs and lows, and that comparing ourselves to others is ultimately a futile exercise.
Exactly.
It brings to mind a quote from the Complete Guide to Getting Over FOMO article.
Oh, okay.
It says, "Life isn't about accumulating more experiences, but rather focusing extremely well on less."
Right.
That really resonated with me.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a beautiful reminder that quality trumps quantity, not just in experiences, but in all aspects of our lives.
Uh-huh.
It's about choosing to invest our time and energy in what truly matters to us, rather than getting distracted by what everyone else is doing.
And that leads us to a really important point about values.
Okay.
When we're clear about what's important to us, it becomes easier to make choices that align with those values, even when faced with that tempting allure of FOMO.
Can you give some examples of how values can guide our decisions in those moments?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's say one of your core values is spending quality time with your family.
Okay.
If you're invited to an event that clashes with a family dinner, you might be tempted by FOMO,
Right.
but your values would remind you that prioritizing that family time is more important to you than attending that event.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that every choice we make comes with a trade-off.
Right.
And when we're clear about our values, we can make those choices with intention and integrity, rather than being swayed by external pressures or fleeting desires.
Exactly.
But it's not just about saying no to things that don't align with our values.
Right.
It's also about proactively creating a life
Right.
that reflects what matters to us.
Absolutely.
How do we do that?
It starts with getting really clear about what those values are.
Okay.
What do you truly care about?
Right.
What brings you joy and fulfillment? Once you have a good understanding of your values, you can start making choices, big and small, that support them.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it brings to mind a conversation I had recently with a friend who was struggling with FOMO around career choices.
Okay.
She felt pressured to pursue a certain path that seemed prestigious and successful, but deep down she knew it wasn't truly aligned with her values.
Mm-hmm.
We spent some time talking about what really mattered to her: creativity, autonomy, making a positive impact.
Yay.
And it helped her to reframe her career goals and pursue a path that felt more authentic and fulfilling.
That's a perfect example of how understanding our values can help us to navigate those challenging decisions and create a life that feels more aligned with who we are and what we want to experience.
It's like instead of chasing external validation or trying to keep up with everyone else, we can create a life that feels intrinsically rewarding and meaningful.
Exactly.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that even when we're living in alignment with our values,
Yeah.
those FOMO feelings might still pop up from time to time.
Right.
It's human nature, after all.
Absolutely.
So what do we do in those moments? How do we navigate those feelings without letting them spiral out of control?
That's where self-care practices become really important. When we're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or disconnected, we're more susceptible to those negative thought patterns that fuel FOMO.
Uh-huh.
But when we prioritize self-care, whether it's getting enough sleep, eating nourishing foods, moving our bodies, or engaging in activities that bring us joy,
Right.
we build resilience and create a buffer against those anxieties.
It's like we're filling our own cups first, so that we're better equipped to navigate the inevitable challenges and temptations of modern life.
Exactly.
But sometimes, even with all these tools and strategies in place,
Right.
FOMO can still feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it can be hard to remember all these tips in the heat of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So what's one key takeaway, one piece of advice that you would offer to someone who's really struggling with FOMO?
You know, if I had to distill it down to one essential piece of advice, it would be this. Cultivate a sense of presence.
Presence.
When we're fully present in the moment, savoring the experiences we're having, appreciating the people around us, and engaging with life with curiosity and openness,
Yeah.
there's simply less room for FOMO to take hold.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's about choosing to focus on the richness of our own lives rather than getting caught up in the illusion of what everyone else is seemingly experiencing.
Right.
But how do we cultivate that sense of presence in a world that's constantly vying for our attention?
It starts with recognizing that presence is a practice, not a destination.
Yeah.
It's something we cultivate moment by moment through intentional choices and actions.
Mm-hmm.
It might involve putting our phones away during meals, taking a few deep breaths before checking social media,
Right.
or simply pausing throughout the day to appreciate the beauty around us.
It's about creating those pockets of stillness and awareness amidst the chaos of daily life.
Exactly.
And over time, as we strengthen that presence muscle,
Yeah.
we find ourselves less reactive to those external triggers and more grounded in the richness of our own experiences.
Right.
But I imagine there are times when even our best efforts to stay present aren't enough,
Uh-huh.
and those FOMO feelings still creep in.
Sure.
What do we do in those moments?
Yeah.
How do we navigate those feelings without letting them spiral out of control?
That's where self-compassion comes in again. It's about recognizing that it's okay to feel those feelings, to acknowledge them without judgment, and to offer ourselves the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a friend.
It's like saying to ourselves, hey, it's okay to feel this way.
Yeah.
Everyone experiences FOMO sometimes.
Right.
It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes simply acknowledging and validating those feelings can be enough to lessen their intensity. It's
Right.
like we're taking the wind out of their sails by refusing to engage in that negative self-talk that often perpetuates the cycle.
It's about choosing to be our own best friend, especially those moments when we're feeling vulnerable or insecure.
Right.
And it makes me think about the importance of connection, not just with others, but with ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cultivating a strong sense of self-connection, of knowing and loving ourselves deeply, can be a powerful antidote to FOMO.
Uh-huh.
Because when we feel secure and content within ourselves, we're less reliant on external validation or experiences to feel whole.
That's such a profound insight.
It's like the more we nurture that inner connection, the less we need to seek it out in the external world.
Right.
And that brings to mind one of the final points highlighted in the sources: the importance of embracing imperfection.
You know, one of the most insidious aspects of FOMO is that it often stems from this unattainable ideal, this belief that everyone else's lives are perfect and that ours should be too.
Right.
But the reality is, everyone struggles. Everyone has their own challenges and insecurities. And embracing that imperfection, both in ourselves and in others, can be incredibly liberating.
It's about letting go of that need to present a perfect image to the world and allowing ourselves to be authentically human, flaws and all.
Exactly.
But that can be a scary proposition, especially in a culture that often glorifies perfection and success.
It definitely takes courage.
Yeah.
But the paradox is, when we embrace our imperfections, we actually become more relatable, more approachable, and ultimately more connected to others.
Right.
Because it allows us to show up as our true selves, without the need to hide or pretend. It's like we're giving ourselves permission to be human with all our messy complexities.
Right.
And in doing so, we create space for others to do the same.
Exactly.
And that brings to mind a powerful concept highlighted in The Fear of Missing Out, FOMO. What It Is and How to Cope article, The Power of Vulnerability. It suggests that when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to share our imperfections and struggles with others, we create opportunities for deeper connection and intimacy.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like we're breaking down those walls of pretense and allowing ourselves to be seen for who we truly are. And in doing so, we invite others to do the same, creating a more authentic and supportive space for connection. But vulnerability can be scary. It requires a certain level of trust and self-acceptance. How do we cultivate that willingness to be vulnerable, especially in a world that often encourages us to put on a brave face and hide our imperfections?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It starts with recognizing that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength. It takes courage to show up authentically, to share our struggles and imperfections, and to risk rejection. But the rewards are immense. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we open ourselves up to deeper connection, greater intimacy, and a more authentic sense of belonging.
It's like we're saying to the world, this is me, flaws and all, take it or leave it. And in doing so, we attract people who love and appreciate us for who we truly are, not the idealized version we might feel pressured to present.
Exactly. And the more we practice vulnerability, the easier it becomes. It's like we're building a muscle, strengthening our capacity to be open and authentic, even in the face of fear or uncertainty.
It's about choosing to live with courage and integrity, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky.
Yeah.
And it brings to mind a beautiful quote from Brené Brown, who has done extensive research on vulnerability. She says, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome.
That's a powerful reminder that vulnerability is not about perfection. It's about authenticity. It's about showing up as our true selves, even when we don't know how it will be received. And often, the most rewarding connections are forged in those moments of shared vulnerability.
It's like we're creating a space for genuine human connection, where imperfections are embraced and authenticity is celebrated. And as we wrap up this deep dive into FOMO, I think that's a beautiful message to leave our listeners with. It's a reminder that we're all in this together, navigating the complexities of modern life, and that by choosing authenticity, vulnerability, and connection, we can create a more fulfilling and meaningful experience for ourselves and for those around us.
Beautifully said. And remember, overcoming FOMO is not about achieving some perfect state of contentment where we never feel those pangs of envy or inadequacy. It's about cultivating a more balanced and compassionate relationship with ourselves and with the world around us. It's about recognizing that those feelings are a natural part of the human experience, and that by choosing to respond to them with kindness, awareness, and intention, we can create a life that feels richer, more authentic, and ultimately more joyful.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable tools and perspectives to help you navigate the complexities of FOMO and create a life that feels more aligned with your values, your passions, and your truest self. Until next time, keep diving deep.